Thank you for the time. Oh yeah, oh Shababa, oh thank you for the time. Hey, yeah, yeah, yeah. For centuries, we have been separated, but we Father pleaded for we to be.
Hello and good evening to each and every one of you. Welcome to Indaba, where knowledge grows. This program seeks to find consensus on issues which affect African lives here in Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean, and across the African diaspora. The program is hosted by the Emancipation Support Committee and is coming to you live from Talk City Studios here in 11A Maraval Road. We are in Indaba, and we are listening, and we welcome you to the listening audience. We welcome you here. We begin today's edition right about now. So let me just bring in our people who are going to be taking over in just a moment.
The struggle that we encounter.
Let me just see if I can bring you in and welcome you. Can you hear me, ladies and gentlemen? And let me introduce Reverend Kwame Kamau.
Greetings.
Shabaka Kambon. Hello.
Hello, Karen.
Hi there.
Nice to be with you.
Pleasure
Same here.
indeed.
Good evening to each and every one of you. And I know that you're going to be interviewing, if I'm correct. You're going to be doing an interview at this moment. Shall I begin that one for you?
That would be so awesome if you can cue that special song. But even as you cue that song, we would certainly like to take the opportunity afforded us now to welcome you to the Indaba program. We know that you've moonlighted in times past and you've done a stellar job of it. But now you're a part of the cast, and we certainly do look forward to a bright and awesome future with you as our hostess there at 91.1 FM. So thank you so much for your gracious hosting on tonight, one of many to come, and we're looking forward to it. We're excited.
I am as well. Thank you so much. I hope I do a fantastic job. I'm going to do my very best tonight. All right.
I'm
so
sure you will.
Without further ado, I'm going to start with this.
there seems to be some delay in the audio. I'm not sure if it's on my end or if it's universal. But while we sort out that technical difficulty tonight, in the first segment of Indaba, I have the opportunity to interview two fantastic guests. One is Glenroy Bongo Grease Halls of the All Mansions of Rastafari. No stranger to this program at all. Indeed, a conscious brother with a heart of excellence. We love this brother very dearly, and he's been on the program many a time, operating as the corporate secretary for the All Mansions, of Rastafari, as well as the assistant chairperson of the same. To balance the program out tonight, we also have an amazing Empress Sharon, of course, is joining us also on tonight. She has the women's department and children's department of the All Mansions of Rastafari, and she's also the coordinator of Empress Men in Rising, a special foundation in tribute, of course, to the wife of the late Emperor, King of Kings, Lord of Lords of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie. And so we do look forward to interview this fantastic duo from the All Mansions of Rastafari concerning the very historic visit of His Imperial Majesty to Trinidad and Tobago. This year marks 57 years since that historic visit. We want to look at the impact of His Imperial Majesty on the Black Power Revolution and vice versa with regards to the process. And so to do that tonight, we have two heavyweight Rastafari leaders to talk about this very powerful and pertinent issue. And so with that said, hopefully we can now queue up Glenroy Hall and Empress Sharon. A very pleasant good night to the both of you.
Yes, greetings to the panel, greetings to everyone, greetings in the name of His Imperial Majesty and His Royal Consort, Empress Men and I.
Greetings indeed to you. I would want you to be a little more increased in terms of your volume so that all of the listeners can hear what you're saying. I'm sure you have a lot to leave with us on tonight. A very pleasant good night to you, Empress Sharon. Welcome to Indaba.
Greetings to one and all in the name of His Majesty and Empress Menegai, Selassie, King Rastafari.
Oh, beautiful. Absolutely. I want to get the ball rolling now. Thankfully, I'm not alone on tonight. I do have my Pan-African revolutionary brother in Shabaka. So while I'll be doing some lead discussant work here, certainly I'm thankful that we have the brother as a wingman on tonight. First question, and I'm going to direct this to the emperor in the room, Bongo Grease. Tell me, take us back some 57 years ago. The historic state visit. It was not just a visit. It was a historic state visit of a reigning monarch of East Africa, at the time Abyssinia. We now call it Ethiopia. Take me back in time through a time device, a portal as it were. Talk to me about the Rastafari community then. Talk to me about the anticipation of this historic visit, and tell me about the emotive feel of such a powerful visit by a reigning emperor, certainly one that the Rastafari, based on the words of the prophetic words of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, saying, look to the east for the coming of a black king. And indeed, that king did come in the fullness of time. Walk me through that process for Rastafari in Trinidad and Tobago. Of all the islands in the Caribbean, he chose Trinidad and Tobago. Walk me through the importance and the significance of that visit.
Greetings again.
Yes, brother.
Greetings to each and everyone. Greetings again in the name of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie and His Royal Consort, Empress Men and I. Today we celebrate the 57th anniversary of the visit of His Imperial Majesty to Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension the Caribbean. It was on the 18th of April, 1966, that His Majesty arrived in Trinidad and Tobago for a state visit from the 18th to the 21st. Prior to the visit, most of our ancient parents were very eager to the anticipation of seeing His Majesty. So at that time, most of the dons in Trinidad and Tobago were gathered at Woodford Square, since Woodford Square was considered our local university. And everyone wanted to see this royal king because since in the Marcus Garvey time, remember the Garveyite movement had a lot of power in Trinidad and Tobago. And everyone was always anticipating this black king. Look to the east for the black king shall come. And Haile Selassie did come. However, upon his visit, the elders, our parents and grandparents, were discussing it at Woodford Square, the Italian invasion of Ethiopia as it pertains to Haile Selassie, and prior to that, they also was discussing the Organization of African Unity, which His Majesty formed in 1963. So it was a full impact, a full impact. However, within the arrival of His Majesty to Trinidad and Tobago, it has actually released the colonial chain on most of the conscious African brothers and sisters in having His Majesty reach here. However, in arrival of His Majesty to Trinidad and Tobago, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church had always been a valuable entity to Ethiopia since the church was here since in the 50s, So prior to the visit, Dr. Eric Williams visited Ethiopia, and it was there His Majesty made the connection Eric Williams visited Ethiopia, 2 years prior to His Majesty visit. And it's there the connection was made that His Imperial Majesty should visit Trinidad. So even it was the accordance of Trinidad and Tobago that Jamaica and Barbados and Haiti was extended an invitation. It was through our diplomatic channels. Even while His Majesty was in Trinidad, Jamaica was not exactly sure at what time they would get a visit. Again, it was through the channels of diplomacy in Trinidad and Tobago that Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean was afforded such a visit.
Wow,
so it was a very powerful time for for all conscious African people in terms of releasing those shackles of colonial slavery.
Absolutely. I could imagine at the time we were only a few years old as a nation ourselves. And so as a result of that, this overstanding Rastafari would say that we are a people downtrodden and second class, of course, to other races. To see a reigning monarch, emperor, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Majesty, be in Trinidad and Tobago, a man certainly who was a statesman, a war hero, fighting off, of course, as you mentioned before, the Italian invasion and ensuring that Ethiopia, Abyssinia at the time, was not colonized, remain a free and independent nation, bringing a lot of pride and a sense of, I guess, for the people, that sense of Pan-Africanism certainly was boosted at that time. I want to turn to the Empress in the room, because whenever there's the king, there's the queen. Whenever there's the emperor, there's the empress. Again, greetings to you. We know that at the side of every great man, there's always a great woman. When I think about His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie, I think about his wife. And immediately in my mind, there are a number of attributes and virtues and values that come to the fore, because I spent a lot of time studying and researching the Queen. You are now the coordinator of a group referred to by Empress Men in Rising. Tell me, what gave rise to the birth of such an organization, and what was the impact of this powerful Queen on your life personally and on Rastafari and Rastafari women that would have allowed for you to again give birth to such a powerful organization with a name that definitely speaks to things that are very progressive for Rastafari and indeed the Pan-African community?
Give thanks to each and every one, and for Indaba for inviting myself and the Rastafari community to have a word song on this platform. Empress Men in Rising came forward through two sisterings just coming together having a conversation that there was no works being done for the Empress. The word is out on the Emperor and the works that he did, but very little was known as far as Empress Menen and the works that she did alongside and independently of Emperor Haile Selassie. So the sisterings decided that they wanted to have an Earth Strong gathering for the Empress to honor her and the works that she did, and empowering the sisterings themselves to do works that are needed alongside the emperors, which are the kings of Rastafari and the region. So we had an event first year, and we had an event this year, which we were honored to have a representative from the Emancipation Support Committee in the form of Sister Zakia, who last year was our Empress of Ceremony, and this year was our honored speaker. So this impact is for the works of Empress Menen. Empress Menen was always in the background doing the works alongside the emperor that are not as well known, but had a major impact on how Ethiopia and extension Rastafari empresses move with elegance, with grace, with humility, and to bring forward a royalness and a steadfast way of standing behind the youth, standing behind their kingmen, standing behind the nation as a whole. So we wanted to make sure that this movement goes forward to have an impact on the youth of today, to show that you don't have to exploit yourself. You don't have to make yourself out to be something that you don't want to be, because that is what is mainstream. Just be royal, just be humble, and let your works be known by the way you present yourself as a youth, as a young woman, as an empress. Give thanks.
Sure. I give thanks for that comment. Definitely, in her we have the modesty. In her we have, again, as you made mention of, a lot of philanthropic works in Ethiopia, pertaining to the youth, but also in general dealing with education as the emperor sought to modernize the then Abyssinia Ethiopian nation into the 20th century at the time. I want to go back to Bongo, Greece a bit. Tell me about the relationship and the marriage. And then, of course, we'll kick it over to my brother. And, of course, for those of you who want to join us, you can do so by way of Facebook. You can do so, of course, by way of YouTube. Of course, looking for our handles in relation to Emancipation Support Committee on Facebook and YouTube, respectively. And then thirdly, you can call us live here, 622-4911. That number again to call, 622-4911. So I turn to the emperor once again. The Black Power Revolution, the Pan-African movement, certainly is a movement that had a number of elements and a number of communities participate within same. Trinidad, it seems, while we are tiny, while we are little, we tend to punch above our weight class, so to speak, in things Pan-African. Henry Sylvester Williams, first Pan-African Conference, 1900, of course, in London, England, etc. Among a number of other works, Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture, of course, Shabaka Kambon himself, the living legend of the 1970 Black Power Revolution. Talk to me about the impact of His Imperial Majesty and Rastafari consciousness in general as an impetus, as a driver that gave a lot of fuel to the Black Power Revolution in Trinidad and Tobago, but beyond Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean. Is there a link? Am I seeing things? Or is there absolutely a link between the two in terms of that consciousness of Rastafari, not only the visit of the king, but the life of the king, the militarism of the king to defend his nation, and of course, the work of the king in terms of the diplomacy, in terms of the OAU, etc. Tell me about the importance of that on the Pan-African movement and, of course, the Black Power Revolution in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean.
Well, give thanks again, give thanks once again. Remember, within His Majesty's visit, One of the main elements of His Majesty's visit was to seek support for the Organization of African Unity, since the Organization of African Unity was formed in 1963. You know, another thing too is that prior to 1966, the 18th of April 1966, on His Majesty's state visit, 4 years after that, 64 and 4 is 70, 4 years after the Black Power Revolution was formed in Trinidad and Tobago. However, during such a time, that the Black Power movement of 1970 actually revitalized the early 1930s, the early 1930s in the struggle of African people fighting against racism, ethnicity, and all the different backgrounds, of oppression, And again, the National Union of Freedom Fighter, most of the youths, even in South and Faizabad, who were members of the National Union of Freedom Fighters, had also joined the revolution of 1970. But apart from the revolution of 1970, or out of the revolution of 1970, came out a stronger National Union of Freedom Fighters, NUF, in which some of the Rastas decided, well, they're going to take a different approach to the revolution, in terms of a face-on guerrilla tactic towards the revolution. And so the guerrilla movements was formed with Rudy John, who was the last of the National Union Freedom Fighters to be shot, and all these things. So the 1970 had actually been the third epoch within the revolution of the Rastafari movement, as it relates to total Pan-Africanism. Because remember, in Rastafari, Pan-Africanism is essential, because it is the liberation on which I stand first and foremost in terms of fighting social injustice.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I kick it off to my brother. I have 1,000 questions for the general and the Empress, but I'm sure he's itching to come in. Brother Shabaka, the floor is yours.
I just want to quickly reiterate what Brother Bongo Grease and Empress Sharon have already said, and which they know, just for the benefit of our listeners to fully understand what they have been saying. First of all, that Haile Selassie, what made Haile Selassie so important to people? What made him a living God in the Caribbean? That up to today is still revered in that capacity. Well, he was that leader on the continent. Remember, in the 1880s, Europe got together and decided to divide up the continent and colonize the whole place. He and his predecessor were the two African leaders who were able to defeat, the only two that were able to ultimately defeat European conquest. And so they represented already a special place in our imagination. Now, Haile Selassie, so we talk about Menelik and his wife Taitu, and then, of course, Haile Selassie after that. Now, when Haile Selassie went to war in the 1930s, the sense that the last piece of remaining free territory on our continent was in danger was enough to inspire all of us across the world to get involved. And so people volunteered across the Caribbean to go and fight in Ethiopia, to risk their lives, and some of them lost their lives to protect this last piece of sovereign territory. We think about our people as disunited and disconnected, but in the 1930s, before the full brunt of colonial education, we still understood that was our continent, that we hadn't given it up. And so, in fact, there was a guy from Charlotte Street called Fauntleroy Julian, who flew one of the 3 airplanes in Selassie's Air Force against the invaders from Italy. And so, and the second part that I think we should emphasize, again, Bongo Grease already said this, was we were living in a place that was steeped in white supremacy, a place where the value of the life of somebody who looked like us was very low. And we were supposed to be subservient, less intelligent, culturally inferior, etc. And here was someone who, in their very existence, their very presence, represented the lie, ensured that was a lie. It was a lie that we were always in the bush naked and we had no culture. No, here was someone who actually embodied that different truth that white supremacy was, that was counter to the narrative about us that white supremacy gave. So when he touched down in Trinidad and in the Caribbean as a whole, there's a great story from Jamaica where he goes up on stage. This is to illustrate the point. And they choose, the Jamaican authorities, someone from the Jamaican elite. And of course, that person is white. At that time, there was no black elite in the Caribbean to speak of. And they choose someone who's important to give him a gift as the royal emperor. And they chose a white person. And you had 100,000 Rastafarians coming down from the hills now to see this. And when she got up to present Selassie, I think it was a painting to Emperor Selassie, the whole crowd started to chant, "Bow Jezebel, bow, bow Jezebel." Literally, it's written about in all the comments. You could go back and watch the videos, right? They wanted to see a white person bow to a black king. Coming from a society where they always had to bow, they had to step off the pavement, they couldn't get a job, they weren't treated fairly, etc., etc. They wanted to see a white, and when she bowed, the crowd went insane, and that is what he represented. So his image was in all our grandparents' homes. After that, he contributed. He came in 1966 in April. In June 1966, just a couple months after, Kwame Ture put his fist in the air and said, "What do we want?" And the crowd answered, "Black power." Those two things married and became strengthened the consciousness in Trinidad, which gave us the Black Power Revolution. And as Brother Grease has said before on this program, along with Brother Trini Levi, that revolution then gave the impetus to the Rastafarian movement. And one of the interesting things that would have happened in that period is that up to then, if you went into jail as a Rastafarian, you would immediately be shaved. My father was one of those who decided, because he had the huge afro, he would not be shaved. He objected to that and ended that practice of having locks cut off in 1970 when he was jailed. So all those kinds of things, that renewed consciousness that came out of 70 then, then contributed to the Rastafarian movement. So it's Selassie contributes to the consciousness contributes to the revolution contributes to the Rastafarian movement. I want to make the connection clear for everybody.
Oh, absolutely. It's a brilliant contribution, certainly. Rastafari would say tribute because Rastafari deal with can business. So that was a very powerful tribute there with regards to same. Turning back to the Empress for, your closing comments. We are in a society now where vulgarity and vice is the way of life for a lot of women, based on, of course, these images coming out of white supremacy spaces that says if you're a black woman or a black person in general, an African, the only way...
Not just for women, it is all of us are involved in vice and vulgarity. It's not just for women, across the board.
Well, we certainly understand that. But there is a particular way, and that's the point I'm making. I want you to understand the point, Rastafari style, where they like to use our women and objectify them in ways that are reminiscent of what was done within chattel slavery and colonization. And the women within Rastafari are indeed a resistance movement against that. Talk to me about Empress Rising, Empress Menin Rising, and the kind of values that you are seeking to bring at this point in time as a counter narrative to that kind of imaging that says if you have to be popular, if you have to be someone of importance, you have to go down a particular narrative. There are two major rap stars, I'm not going to mention their name, out of Trinidad and Tobago, and both of them sell vice and vulgarity in order to have a claim for fame. You are dealing with royalty and regalness and majesty within Empress Menin Rising. Tell me, what is the importance of such a counter narrative in this here time for an Empress mother like you, looking at the current and future generations?
Give thanks again. Empress Menin Rising, we are not at the moment an organized body. We are just systems coming together, realizing that the liberty.
You can make
Go right ahead,
Just to
Empress.
clarify that
We're-
the radio station has gone to the lotto, but we are still live on Facebook and on StreamYard and on the Emancipation Support Committee's other outlets. So we are still live. Let's continue the discussion. We'll rejoin the radio station when they come back.
Yes,
Thank
give
you
thanks.
so much. Go right ahead, Empress.
Yes, the empresses have been in the background for many, many years, since the beginning of the Rastafari movement, since the beginning of time. The women have always taken a back seat, as they say. But Empress Men in Rising is to show forth that the empresses have a platform. They have a space where they feel safe, where they can voice their opinions, where they can have a space for their youths to even have togetherness, where they don't have that. And for once and once to cite our liberty as royalty. When we greet each other in love. Everything is done. We may not always agree, but we always do things in love, knowing that there's better to come. Yes, atrocities have happened, but we have to move forward through that with our youths, for our future, for Rastafari as a whole, and as a shining beacon to ones and ones who may not want to do what the mainstream does, but they don't see any other way. So we're coming forward now to show them that there is another way. You don't have to dress in short clothes, and you don't have to parade yourself as a piece of something. You are royal. You are an empress. You are someone to be held in.
Live, my sister.
Sorry?
What are we going to do for Selassie's this special anniversary this year? When we come back live, we got to let our listeners know what are we going to do this year for this anniversary. We have
for the emphasis or for Rastafari as a whole?
Yes, this particular anniversary of Selassie's visit. What are we going to? Are we doing anything special that we want the public to know about?
There was an event yesterday in Siparia with a gathering of many Rastafari that gathered for the celebration on the 18th, which is the date that he landed in Trinidad. So there was an event then. I'm not sure if other Rastafari communities are doing something in addition to that, but there were events in Siparia at the 12th tribe of Israel had their celebration. Other houses had their celebrations. I'm not sure if it has been extended to the rest of the days that he was in Trinidad, which would have been until the 21st, I believe. Correct me, Bongo Grease? What was the date that Selassie flew to another country? Was it the 20th?
The 18th to the 21st.
To the 21st. Yes. I'm not sure if other houses will be having other events up until the 21st. But there wasn't an event yesterday or many celebrations yesterday for the arrival of Selassie into Trinidad.
Indeed. Special. So let's just, Brother Kwame, let's tell our listeners on the radio that we've been chatting while they were gone. We've been rejoined by our radio listenership. And we are asking Sister Empress and Brother Bongo Grease, if there are any other events. They've told us that there were events already to celebrate the anniversary of Selassie's visit. We're asking if there are any more events coming up that the public could attend. Brother Bongo, are you aware of any?
No, I'm not aware, but I know that on the first day, which is the 18th, the Bobo Shanti brothers had a marvelous session in Siparia yesterday, where it was, also other Rastafari families attended to celebrate the High Liberation, which was a very powerful High Liberation in Siparia yesterday. Apparently, I cannot recall, but I know in the other countries like Barbados and other places, there's a week of celebrations. Hence the reason my message today towards this 57th anniversary to the Rastafari movement in Trinidad and Tobago is that the time has come where, our future, our future has to be, more more of a unity nature, because our future demands our unity. And as such, it is important that we continue to forge a common goal 57 years after His Majesty came, in avoiding petty prejudice, malice, and all these things, and come to one common goal in order to forge a positive nation, so that as Rastafari, we can pass the baton. Again, I give thanks to the sisterin for being a strength and a tower unto the Rastafari. And I also say to other Rastafari sisterins that, the time has come where there's no need to be unhappy. Again, because of the fact that we are living in a more or less a technological age. And today we respect the Omega. We respect the Omega balance. Absolutely. We cannot live without the Omega balance within Rastafari. That's Absolutely. Why brethren and sisters come together. However, within the Omega balance within Rastafari, there's always work for the female energy in terms of health, education, information technology. There's so much work where the Omega energy can strengthen Rastafari, and we have to welcome them. Yeah. So
on that
again,
front, we have a note from our technical saying that we have to go to the Africa report. So we salute both of you for your the All Mansions represents that unity. We salute that. We salute you for your work in that regard, and we are going to go straight to the Africa report. We invite you to stay with us. Thank you.
Give thanks.
Royal salute, always.
All right, everyone. So just to let you know what is coming, it's concerning the Friday 21st is the anniversary of the first arrests and detentions of the leaders of Trinidad and Tobago's Black Power movement. And the Africa Report recognizes this day by paying tribute to South Africa's most celebrated Black consciousness leader, Steve Biko, who was murdered by agents of the apartheid government in 1976. So let us go in and listen.
Repeatedly that successful mass revolutionary movements are driven by a common ideology of progress and hope, as well as charismatic leadership. The Black Power movements of the 1960s and 1970s revolved around two distinct ideologies. One was militant and revolutionary, with its apex in the Black Panther Party. The other was militant but conservative and grounded in civil disobedience and constitutional change. Other outgrowths of Black Power perched or tried to perch between these two ideologies. South Africa closely paralleled the United States of America. That is, apartheid was synonymous with Jim Crowism. Both countries operated systems of internal colonialism and subjugated blacks to white supremacism. If you want an understanding of the concept and ideology of Kwame Ture's Black Power, I invite you to read his book, Black Power, The Politics of Liberation in America, published in 1967. Or simply go and check out the many videos of his speeches on YouTube. This week's Africa Report pays special tribute to Bantu Stephen Biko, popularly known simply as Steve Biko of South Africa. The report explores Biko's principal ideas on Black consciousness and the psychological emancipation for Black Africans. The key work on this subject is the book, I Write What I Like, a compilation of Biko's speeches and writings delivered between 1969 and 1974. The book could be justifiably compared to the philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey, compiled by his wife, Amy Jack Garvey. Steve Biko was one of the greatest stalwarts of the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. This is how the narrator on the African Biometrics YouTube channel describes Biko.
Biko was one of the most prominent leaders in the anti-apartheid struggle, and in some quarters, he was seen as the most important Black South African leader of his generation. He was so important, in fact, that the apartheid government was terrified of him. Bantu Steve Biko inspired a generation of Black South Africans to claim their true identity and refuse to be part of their own oppression.
More than any other anti-apartheid leader, Biko understood, like Frantz Fanon, the Matniken, and Marcus Garvey, the incorruptible father of Caribbean black consciousness, that the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is control of the minds of the oppressed. Biko's speeches reflect knowledge of these great Pan-Africanists, as well as Aimé Césaire and other Matnican. Let's talk a little about who was Steve Biko before we engage his ideas. Biko was born in the Eastern Cape in 1946. His father died when he was only 4 years old, after which he was raised by his mother. At primary school, Biko was naturally brilliant and always way ahead of his age group in grasping difficult concepts. He grew up in South Africa when apartheid was a full-blown white supremacist system that marginalized and degraded every aspect of the life of a black person. The education available to blacks was primarily to train them for manual labor, particularly as domestics and unskilled agricultural laborers. In 1964, Biko was arrested alongside his elder brother Kaya for associating with the outlawed POCO organization, the armed wing of the Pan-African Congress. Kaya was imprisoned for 2 years, but Biko was released. After graduating from college, Biko registered as a medical student at the black section of the University of Natal, where he became a member of NUSAS, N-U-S-A-S, the National Union of South African Students, which was founded by white students. Like the rest of white South Africa, NUSAS rigidly practiced racial segregation, monopolized the leadership positions of the organization, and treated blacks as lesser humans. The turning point for Biko was his attendance of the NUSAS annual conference in 1967. Whereas the white and Indian students were given decent accommodation for the conference, the African students were told that they could sleep in a nearby church where conditions were very appalling. They also had to sit separately and eat separately from the white and Indian students. Biko would later acknowledge that this conference led him to reject the multiracial approach to political activism. He believed that political liberation for black South Africans would be possible only under black leadership. Accordingly, he and other black students broke from NUSAS and founded their own organization, SASO, S-A-S-O, the South African Students Organization. Within a very short time, SASO was established on campuses across the country. It was SASO that influenced black high school students to establish the militant organization called the South African Students Movement, or SASM, across South Africa to advocate for the repeal of the Bantu Education Act that compelled black teachers to use Afrikaans for instruction. In order to spread his ideology beyond the walls of educational institutions, Biko founded the Black Consciousness Movement, which was inspired by Marcus Garvey's UNIA. The BCM was mandated to come up with social, economic, and political structures independent of the white-led systems. Biko and his SASO colleagues also established the Black People's Convention, an umbrella body to coordinate all black consciousness activities. Let me now highlight some of Biko's principal ideas and maxims. It is well known that when black people fight back against racism, their activities are labeled reverse racism. Biko had this to say: one cannot be a racist unless he has the power to subjugate. On the issue of missionary Christianity, he wrote, "They constantly urge the people to find fault in themselves, and by so doing detract from the essence of the struggle in which the people are involved." Deprived of spiritual content, the black people read the Bible with a gullibility that is shocking. While they sing in a chorus of mea culpa, they are joined by white groups who sing a different version, tua culpa. Mea culpa means, I'm guilty. Tua culpa means, you are guilty. The meaning of that is that black people should be made to feel guilty for struggling for their own liberation. The relationship between implanted inferiority complex and lack of pride in one's skin and African race features was a major subject of black consciousness movements worldwide. This is how Biko summed up the implications. Being black is not a matter of pigmentation. Being black is a reflection of a mental attitude. Merely by describing yourself as black, you have started on a road towards emancipation. You have committed yourself to fight against all forces that seek to use your blackness as a stamp that marks you out as a subservient being. The fact that we are not white does not necessarily mean that we are all black. Non-whites do exist and will continue to exist and will continue to exist for quite a long time. If one's aspiration is whiteness, but his pigmentation makes attainment of this impossible, then that person is a non-white. Any man who calls a white man boss, any man who serves in the police force or security branch is ipso facto a non-white. Black people, real black people, are those who can manage to hold their heads high in defiance rather than willingly surrender their souls to the white man. Biko addressed the futility of hoping that the oppressor one day would wake up to the immorality of his oppression. Biko wrote, "We must realize that our situation is not a mistake on the part of whites, but a deliberate act, and that no amount of moral lecturing will persuade the white man to correct the situation. The system concedes nothing without demand." Frederick Douglass had expressed a similar conviction more than a century earlier. Political independence before the achievement of black consciousness would lead inevitably to entrapment by neocolonialism. Thus, Biko believed that true emancipation must be preceded by collective black consciousness. Biko stated, "Black consciousness is an attitude of the mind and a way of life, the most positive call to emanate from the black world for a long time. Its essence is the realization by the black man of the need to rally together with his brothers around the cause of their oppression, the blackness of their skin, and to operate as a group to rid themselves of the shackles that bind them to perpetual servitude. It is based on a self-examination which has ultimately led them to believe that by seeking to run away from themselves and emulate the white man, they are insulting the intelligence of whoever created them black. The philosophy of black consciousness, therefore, expresses group pride and the determination of the black to rise and attain the envisaged self. Hence, thinking along lines of black consciousness makes the black man see himself as a being complete in himself. It makes him less dependent and more free to express his manhood. At the end of it all, he cannot tolerate attempts by anybody to dwarf the significance of his manhood." In 1976, after more than a year-long court trial, Biko was imprisoned and shortly after murdered by white policemen. Ultimately, these were probably his most powerful words. "It is better to die for an idea that will live than to live for an idea that will die."
For that Africa Report. And welcome back, Shabaka and guests, for the viewpoint. What have we lost? What have we gained? The 1970 Black Power Revolution.
Yes, indeed. So taking off from where Dr. Fergus left us there, let us salute on this, the eve of April 21st, where the state of emergency was declared in 1970, and the leaders of the Black Power Revolution were rounded up and put in jail. We want to salute the Black Power generation, and now we're talking about not just those leaders, that smaller group, but the entire generation of people who were men and women who were born under colonial rule in the 1930s and 40s, who demanded more fundamental and revolutionary transformation from independence through tremendous personal sacrifice, with some paying the ultimate price in the vein of Steve Biko in South Africa. So I have with me my dear friend and guest here, Danielle Fredericks, from the Institute for Indigenous Knowledge and Empowerment and Research. And she and I are going to spend the next 10 minutes running through some of the things that, some of the key gains or areas in which people tend to discuss 1970, to look for gains and also for where we have regressed since that time. And of course, we will be joined, if we could do that in the next 5 minutes, we'll be rejoined by our other guests in studio. So let's start perhaps, Danielle, with one of the things highlighted by Dr. Fergus. He talked about Steve Biko, the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the minds of the oppressed. Quickly for you, what are the top three things that would stand out in terms of 1970, in terms of the consciousness that particular period brought us?
I think one of the, some of the things that stood out was the preparation for the 1970. People tend to behave as if it is 1970 was one individual act, when it was a preparation period and a number of years that brought it about. And in the vein of Steve Biko, in order for the persons who were involved in the 1970s to be important, or for them to rally the people, they had to educate the people. They had to bring us consciousness and knowledge of self, and to the people. Only then did the people themselves decide that it was time to agitate for something more. So that was an important gain, understanding of self. But I feel as if that is also one of the things that we lost, because after the integration into the mainstream society, which was one of the things that we want, what we stopped doing is interrogating self. We stopped asking the questions of whether or not the mainstream was beneficial to us, if there were alternative ways of doing it, and even if it is the mainstream was made for us. So we lost community, the same community that helped us agitate for our independence and more representation was the same community that it seemed as if it is we gave up in order to integrate into the mainstream society.
Okay, so just to quickly list some of the things in that era. When we talk about the consciousness coming out of 1970, we are talking about a period in time where we were stamped with the inferiority of colonialism. Colonialism had stamped us with inferiority. The way we looked, the way our hair came out of our heads naturally, color of our skin, all these things were inferior. And of course, all those things would have been challenged. The way we dressed, the way we ate, what we ate, every single thing, our culture, etc., etc. On that subject, let me bring you into tomorrow. There's the opening of the launch of the Black Power Conference at the University of West Indies. The very first subject is the subject of religion. How would you say that? What do you think came out of the Black Power movement in that area? This is a challenge to you, and if this was a hard one,
I think one of the gains that we got out. Oh, okay.
Go ahead, no, Daniel. This one is for you.
Okay. I think one of the gains from a spiritual point of view, I wouldn't say religious point of view, for Blackness out of 1970s was the freedom and the people such as the Oratio, the Shouter Baptists, and they coming out from the shadows and literally the hills and becoming a little more mainstream and integrated and having a sense of self, which we see growing and the spaces for that growing. I also think that one of the groups that we very rarely acknowledge for the price that they paid and continue to pay after 1970 for us being able to walk around with the hair that we walk around with the freedom in public spaces is the Rastafari community. I think that the Rastafari community for many years after 1970 paid a heavy price for their hair, the way they live their life, the food, and now we find that their hair and their philosophies are in the mainstream and they are not given the credit for bringing ital food, understanding of sugar, low salt. A lot of those things are being subsumed under good health and Eurocentrism and not under Rastafari, who brought it to us first way back then.
Yeah, let me bring in Reverend Kamau here, because it wasn't just in terms of creating space now for African religious and spiritual practices to remove the yoke of inferiority from those practices. But it was also within the traditional Christian fraternity as well. There was some changes after 1970. Brother Kamau, can you speak to that? In your capacity as the Reverend?
Yes, I would briefly. Thank you for the question. Admittedly, while there were some changes in terms of persons who were, in the pews, now finding their way to the pulpits and taking on certain roles within leadership, within the mainstream, in quotes, religions in Trinidad and Tobago. Unfortunately, enough has not been done to right the wrongs of white supremacy as they are found in those so-called mainstream and traditional establishments. So there was really segregation.
But I think you
definitely a topic for another day. 1000%.
I think you hit upon the thing exactly, that we had that transformation within the structures of the mainstream religion. So whereas before there was a glass ceiling in the Anglican Church, perhaps in Catholic Church, you find that in those traditional churches they removed that ceiling to some extent, and you started to have an upward progression of people of color, including African people, and also you started to have changes in the way that they celebrated. So, for example, you had Brother Telfer, who just passed away, who would beat the drum in the Catholic Church. He had drummers who would go to Catholic churches and be part of the ceremonies and so on in his own home, handmade kind of African wear and so on. So all those things were part of the process. You actually had some people who were active in the movement who then transitioned into the church environment and rose up the ranks there as well. In fact, we interviewed one last year. Let's talk about business, the commanding heights of the economy. Danielle.
I still think that we have a long way to go, because there is structural anti-blackness that is built into our societies that we seem to not be aware of, because again, it is structural. But it's almost like if it is, we stop looking for the disenfranchisement and the built-in pitfalls that was in the system before 1970, because we became a part of the system, and it feels like we had an exchange. So we bought into the concept that all was equal and all was free, when in truth and in fact, there are a lot of anti-black attitudes and behaviors that impact how it is we enter business, how we are sustained in business, and how we grow in business, from the creativity, from our ideas being developed from a national point of view, as well from a regional point of view. So we have a lot more conversations that need to happen, and spaces like Indaba and other such spaces need to be created for us to reason out how we go forward.
Indeed. So I love that point, and I think that is well taken. We have 2 more minutes, so let me just say quickly that for the benefit of our listeners, when we think in terms of the economic benefits or transformations of 1970, there are a number of things. At the grassroots level, the revolution said that what we produced had value. So the Rastafarian brothers and sisters who produced leather goods and bags and all kinds of craft and so on, their stuff suddenly became important. The leaders of the revolution made it their business to buy their clothes from their people, to buy their shoes and sandals from their people. All that was part of the new framework. In terms of small businesses, the government started to give small businesses grants and so on, and create opportunities for small businesses, and to create opportunities for the development of a middle class within the formal sector. In terms of the commanding heights of the economy now, the government began to nationalize. What we just lost the other day in terms of Petrotrin was one of the products of 1970. So you now had African people who were previously barred from, and Indians as well, barred from taking on, going abroad and studying and coming back and using the full strength of their qualifications at the highest level, now allowed to do that in the oil industry that was nationalized, to control those areas and to deal. So you had this, a whole development across the board economically. And of course, as you said, we still have those structures in place, those discriminatory structures, white supremacy structures that we live with, that we have not challenged in the last perhaps 40 years and so in the last decade after 1970. And of course, they are undermining the progress that we made in that time all the time. So I think we've covered those areas. Empress, you want to say a word here? You're still with
I'm so grateful to be allowed the privilege of being heard as Royal Empress of the Rastafari movement. I give much thanks.
Okay, indeed. And Brother Kamau, your closing comments. We are at 9 o'clock, so we got to wrap up now and turn it back to Karen.
I certainly would just like to thank the guests for coming out and thank certainly Karen for joining us on the program tonight. Thank you so much.
All right, Karen, you can wrap up now on 91.1. Guys, say goodnight to our listeners there.
All right, and let's do that. Okay, everyone, it is Indaba, where knowledge grows. Connect again with ESC by going to their Facebook page, Emancipation Support Committee -ESCTT. And on Instagram, you can go to TT_ESC, leave a comment or a direct message and check them out. There's a lot of interesting videos, historical info, tributes, fashion, and so much more. And join a next edition of Indaba here next week, Wednesday at 8 p.m. on Talk City, your address for talk.
Some from there.